The air is heavy. Torches gutter in the salt, wet wind. A young man in bronze greaves creeps into a cavern where every rock seems to breathe. On the floor lie scattered bodies, their faces frozen in the last instant of terror, and at the center sleeping, her hair a tangle of living snakes, waits Medusa. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments. If you're into this kind of deep dive, tap like and subscribe. Why does this matter? Because Medusa is more than a monster. She's a cipher, a riddle that has haunted art, myth and psychology for over 4 millennia. And the deeper you look, the older she becomes. The familiar story unfolds in tense fragments. Perseus, son of Zeus and Danae, has been sent on a quest by a jealous king. His task: bring back the head of Medusa, whose gaze turns all who meet it to stone. He walks armed not with brute strength but with borrowed gifts. A polished bronze shield from Athena, winged sandals to fly, and a curved blade sharp enough to sever destiny itself. Step closer. Perseus holds the shield high, not as armor, but as mirror. He dares not meet her eyes. The snakes stir, scales rasping against one another like dry leaves. His hand tightens on the sword, and with a single stroke clean, merciless, her head falls. From her blood surge 2 children of impossible form, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the giant. It should end here, but it does not. Perseus stuffs the head into a leather sack, a talisman as deadly in death as in life. Later, Athena herself will mount it on her aegis, turning Medusa from hunted horror into protective shield. Across temples, mosaics, and coins, her bulging eyes and tusked grin glare out not as curse, but as safeguard. What kind of monster guards instead of destroys? The ancients knew her image was not simple. The Odyssey speaks of a Gorgon's head guarding the gates of Hades, long before Hesiod gave Medusa her sisters' names. By the 6th century before Christ, her face already covered temple pediments like the one at Corfu, warning intruders, turn back or be turned to stone. But here's where it gets strange. Scholars now argue that Medusa may be far older than the Greeks who named her. Bronze Age figurines from Knossos serpent goddesses clutching snakes stand centuries earlier. Near Eastern demonesses like Lamashtu, lion-headed and serpent-clawed, haunted Mesopotamian nightmares as early as 2200 before Christ. If Medusa's roots sink that deep, her secret is not 2700 years old. It is more than 4000. So the question is not just, who was Medusa? The question is, how did an image of terror, carved in temple stone, whisper across empires, changing from goddess to monster to muse? The story is older than the marble ruins, older than the verses of Hesiod, perhaps older even than Greece itself. And the trail, as we'll see next, begins with words, ink, and clay tablets that first recorded the name. Who wrote her into being, and who reshaped her across centuries? Picture a scribe bent over a wax tablet in the fading light of an oil lamp. The year is roughly 700 before Christ. The poet Hesiod has just placed Medusa among the 3 Gorgon sisters in his Theogony. It is the first time her name survives in writing lines 270 through 300 nestled among genealogies of gods and monsters, and here Hesiod makes her different. Unlike her immortal sisters Stheno and Euryale, Medusa alone is mortal, vulnerable, killable. That small detail sets the stage for the tale of Perseus. This is where the paper trail begins, but the shadows stretch backward. A century earlier, Homer's Odyssey Book 11 mentions the Gorgon's head haunting the underworld's threshold. The name Medusa is absent, yet the menace is there, an image so dreadful that Odysseus himself fears its approach. Already, the myth was moving between oral recitation and the permanence of ink. Why does this transmission matter? Because myths survive only when they travel. From Hesiod's 8th century lines, Medusa's story fanned out through lyric poets like Pindar, who in the 5th century before Christ described Athena wearing her head on the aegis. By the time sculptors raised the pediment of the Temple of Artemis at Corfu around 580 before Christ, the Gorgon face had grown massive, snarling, tongue lolling, flanked by panthers. Archaeologist John Boardman notes that this is not mere decoration, but an apotropaic emblem, architecture as incantation. Words carried her too. Ovid's Metamorphoses, written around the year 8 of our era, gave her the most famous backstory. Once a maiden violated by Poseidon in Athena's temple, then punished by transformation into snake-haired terror. That Roman retelling would dominate Western imagination for nearly 2,000 years. It is in Ovid that Medusa becomes not just monster but victim, a detail that later ages alternately emphasized or suppressed. Transmission also meant reinterpretation. Roman villas in Pompeii featured mosaic Medusas at thresholds, her glare warding evil spirits from kitchens and courtyards. Seneca, writing tragedies in the 1st century after Christ, invoked her head as shorthand for absolute terror. Christian chroniclers later reframed her as allegory for sin itself, stripping away divine nuance. By the 13th century, Islamic scholar al-Qazwini included petrifying beings resembling Gorgons in his Wonders of Creation. Medieval bestiaries would even merge her with basilisk law-beast and bird tangled into one petrifying archetype, and in the Age of Rediscovery, Renaissance artists unearthed her once more. Caravaggio's shield painting of 1597 depicts her decapitated head in the moment of death, blood spurting, eyes alive with rage. Leonardo sketched her face as vortex of snakes. The same story that began with Hesiod's dry genealogy now haunted Europe's canvases as symbol of chaos, fear, and fascination. But here's the twist. With every transmission, editors made choices. Medieval copyists who found Ovid's tale too brutal quietly erased the rape, presenting Medusa as simply monstrous. 19th century children's anthologies repeated Perseus's triumph, but spared readers the violence. Even in translation, her name shifted. Medeta Omicron Upsilon Sigma Alpha, the protectress, became the Latin Medusa, the monstrous mask. So what really is the age of this myth? Is it the 27 centuries since Hesiod, or the 4,200 years since Bronze Age figurines clutched their serpents in silent halls? The answer depends on which thread you follow, text, stone, or story, and that is what we turn to next. The data hidden in motifs and classifications, the system scholars use to map myths like constellations across time. Imagine shelves of old folktale indexes, their pages not filled with stories but with codes. To scholars of myth, every monster, miracle, and quest is catalogued like a specimen. Medusa, despite her fame, never received her own full slot in the Arne-Thompson-Luther system. Yet her pieces do appear. Her deadly gaze aligns with motif F, 531.2. Deadly look petrifies victims. Her beheading echoes motif D, 1361.2. Decapitation of monster with magical aid. Even Perseus's mirrored shield fits the archetype of trickster tools, brains defeating brute force. Why does this matter? Because coding myths lets us trace them like migrating flocks. When the same motifs appear in far-flung lands, snakes as chthonic power, eyes as weapons, severed heads retaining power, we suspect a root older than any single culture. Now let's do the math. The earliest secure written source, Hesiod's Theogony, dates to around 700 before Christ. Subtract that from the present year 2025, and you get roughly 2,725 years. That is the minimum, the bedrock. But if we follow the serpent women of Bronze Age Crete, carved around 1600 before Christ, or the demoness Lamashtu of Mesopotamia, feared since 2200 before Christ, then Medusa's ancestry stretches closer to 4,200 years. The number in our title is not invention, it is lineage. But here's where evidence becomes slippery. The Gorgon iron, the grotesque face of Medusa, shows up in 6th century temple art, like on the Corfu pediment. John Boardman argued in 1998 that these early images served as apotropaic amulets, not narrative scenes. The tale of Perseus decapitating Medusa may have been grafted onto an already ancient protective symbol. In other words, the story came after the face. And what of her name? Philologist Robert Beekes, 2010, traces Medusa to the Greek Medine, to protect, to rule. Not a destroyer, but a guardian. Words, like motifs, carry secrets. They suggest she was once invoked, not as terror, but as shield, a goddess before she was a monster. So we have data points, codes of petrifying eyes and severed heads, age math pointing toward 4 millennia, etymology whispering of guardianship. The evidence tilts toward a story that was never meant to be just a hero's conquest. But pause here. If motifs echo across continents, then where else do we find her likeness? If Medusa's face is older than Greece, who were her sisters beyond myth? The answers lie in cross-cultural mirrors, snakes in the hands of priestesses, lion-headed demons at the edges of deserts, and bird women who lure sailors to their doom. To see Medusa clearly, we must first look beyond Greece. Step into the fresco-lit chambers of Knossos, around 1600 before Christ. In one hand, a woman raises a writhing snake. In the other, she holds another serpent aloft. Her bare chest gleams in the lamplight, her wide eyes fixed forward. This is the Minoan snake goddess, a figure Arthur Evans unearthed in 1903. She is no monster, but a priestess or goddess, serene yet commanding, flanked by serpents that coil like living extensions of her power. Scholars such as Nano Marinatos, 1993, argue that Medusa's roots may lie in these early Mediterranean snake cults. Cross eastward to Mesopotamia. There, the Akkadian demoness Lamashtu lurks in incantation tablets from as early as 2200 before Christ. Lion-headed, bird-footed, often shown clutching serpents, she preys on mothers and infants. Martin West, 1997, traced links between her serpentine features and the monstrous feminine that would later surface in Greek Gorgons. Both embody dread of uncontrolled female power, fertile yet dangerous, liminal between life and death. Head north to the Scythian steppes. Stories survive of a half-woman, half-serpent ancestress who bore children to Heracles. Her coiled body, half hidden in earth, mirrors the Gorgon's fusion of human and serpent. In each tradition, the snake is never just animal. It is chthonic emblem shedding skin as symbol of rebirth, coiling underground as messenger of death. And further west, Celtic lore whispers of Kyaich, the hag who shapes landscapes and petrifies men with her gaze. Though her eyes freeze not in stone but in winter's ice, the motif resonates. One glance, one season, immobilizes life. Across cultures, the stare is as potent as the serpent. Even in South Asia, parallels abound. Nagini figures serpent women in Hindu and Buddhist tradition guard treasures and rivers. They are not monsters, but guardians, protective yet perilous if disrespected. The etymology of Medusa, the protectress, finds kinship here. Across millennia and continents, serpent women emerge as liminal figures, between goddess and demon, sanctuary and snare. Why does this cross-cultural echo matter? Because it shows that Medusa is not an isolated freak of Greek imagination. She is one node in a vast mythic web where snakes, eyes, and women intertwine. Snakes shed skin, so do myths. Each culture redresses the same figure in new garb. But here's the startling implication. If Minoan snake goddesses predate Hesiod by 1,000 years, and Mesopotamian Lamashtu by 1,500, then Medusa's roots are not only pan-Mediterranean but global. Her secret is not just age, it is universality. So the question becomes, why snakes? Why petrifying eyes? What did ancient people see in these images that was worth carving into stone and fearing in ritual? To answer, we must shift from geography to symbolism, from where Medusa came from to what she meant. The temple air is thick with incense, the floor cool stone under bare feet. Before the altar, a shield gleams with a monstrous face hammered into its bronze, bulging eyes, fangs, hair alive with snakes. To an ancient viewer, this was not nightmare art, it was protection. An apotropaic mask designed to turn away evil by confronting it with something worse. Medusa's symbolism works on many levels. Snakes, in Mediterranean religions, embodied both death and regeneration. Shedding skin linked them to rebirth. Burrowing into earth tied them to the underworld. Scholars like Daniel Ogden, 2013, read Medusa's serpent hair as more than grotesque ornament. It is a visual shorthand for chthonic power, sexuality, and immortality fused. Consider the act of decapitation. In myths, severing a head often controls chaos, containing power in a portable form. The Gorgon's head did not die with her. It became talisman, weapon, shield. As Françoise Frontissi-Ducreux, 1986, noted, the act transforms destructive force into protective amulet. A paradox, the monster slain becomes the city's guardian. Even Perseus's tools carry symbolism. The mirrored shield Athena's gift represents reason and cunning overcoming direct terror. Jean-Pierre Vernant, 1980, argued that this is technology defeating brute force. The hero does not stare down horror, he redirects it. The shield becomes allegory for wisdom itself. Colours deepen the code. The snake's green glisten, the blood's crimson gush, the bronze's golden sheen. These are not idle hues. They echo the liminal threshold between life and death, fertility and destruction. Numbers play their part too. 3 Gorgon sisters, like the triple fates and triple furies, embody completeness of terror. Only Medusa is mortal, making her the vulnerable pivot around which the myth spins. And beyond symbols lies ritual. On hoplite shields, the Gorgonians stared out at enemies across the battlefield. As Anthony Snodgrass, 1999, described, these grotesque visages were psychological warfare. Freeze the foe before the first spear is thrown. In a sense, every soldier wielded Medusa's petrifying gaze. But here's where anthropology intrudes. The head as fetish object is not uniquely Greek. From shrunken heads of the Amazon to skull cults of Neolithic Jericho, severed heads preserved power. The Gorgon's head belongs in this global pattern where death does not end agency but concentrates it. So what do we see? Medusa is not simply monster. She is mask, amulet, weapon, goddess. She is the boundary where sacred and profane meet. And the rituals around her, shield bosses, temple pediments, mosaic thresholds, show she was never just a story. She was lived symbol, staring down intruders in stone and bronze. But what happens when meaning shifts? When Athena's shield becomes Ovid's victim-blaming, when Freud turns her into psychoanalytic terror, when feminists reclaim her as banner of resistance, that is where we turn next. The debates, distortions, and myths to debunk. Because Medusa is not finished. She has been rewritten by every age that dared to look her in the eye. A candlelit scriptorium. A monk copies Ovid's Metamorphoses but pauses at the lines describing Medusa's violation in Athena's temple. He hesitates, then omits them. In the medieval manuscript that survives, Medusa is no longer a maiden punished after rape she is born monstrous. The erasure is subtle, but its effect resounds for centuries. This is the first debate. Was Medusa always a monster, or did she become one through Roman reinterpretation? In Hesiod, she is already dreadful, slain by Perseus with divine tools. In Ovid, she is transformed as punishment after Poseidon's assault. To modernize, that reads as victim blaming a goddess, punishing not the aggressor, but the victim. Scholars like Froma Zeitlin, 1991, argue that this reflects patriarchal anxieties encoded into myth. Yet to others, it is allegory of divine justice. Desecration of a temple demands consequence, regardless of blame. Which reading is true? The myth never answers. Psychoanalysts found their own meaning. Sigmund Freud's Medusa's Head, 1922, called her petrifying face a symbol of castration anxiety, the male viewer frozen before terrifying female power. Feminist thinkers, such as Hélène Cixous, 1975, countered that this interpretation is itself a patriarchal projection, reducing a complex myth to male fear. For Cixous and later scholars, Medusa should be read instead as figure of resilience, a woman whose gaze resists control. Another distortion lies in simplification. Children's storybooks of the 19th century rewrote Perseus's quest as moral fable of bravery conquering evil. The snakes, the blood, the horror all softened. Caravaggio's blood-spurting head is replaced with tidy illustrations where Perseus smiles victoriously. Here, the myth is reduced to hero versus monster, scrubbed clean of ambiguity. Christian writers also reshaped her. In medieval sermons, the Gorgon head became allegory for sin's grip on the soul. To resist temptation was to hold the mirror shield, to turn away the deadly gaze. In this reading, Medusa is no longer goddess or victim, but moral warning, and in modern times, another twist: activism. In 2017, amid the Me Too movement, Medusa resurfaced as emblem of women's rage. Social media posts reframed her as survivor rather than villain. Artists painted her not decapitated but standing tall, gaze unflinching. Where Freud saw anxiety, feminists saw defiance. But here's a misconception we must confront: the claim that Medusa is merely about Perseus's triumph. The archaeological record, temple pediments, shield bosses, mosaic thresholds suggest otherwise. Her head was worshipped, not feared alone. It guarded, protected, sanctified. To see her only as monster slain is to miss half the truth. So where does this leave us? With a story twisted by centuries of retelling, censored for children, psychoanalyzed for theory, weaponized for ideology. Each age has made its Medusa, the Greek maiden, the Roman victim, the Christian allegory, the psychoanalytic terror, the feminist icon. Which is she really? Perhaps all of them. Or perhaps the truth is simpler, that the power of her face lies in its refusal to be fixed. And that takes us to our final turn. Why Medusa endures. Why a 4,000-year-old face still glares from shields, canvases, and hashtags. Why her secret is not just age, but relevance. The shield rests in a glass case in Florence. Painted by Caravaggio in 1597, Medusa's decapitated head still bleeds, eyes wide, mouth mid-scream. Visitors lean in close, and even through museum glass, some instinct makes them recoil. The gaze has lost none of its force. 4 millennia after her first whispers, Medusa still freezes us. Why does she endure? Because she condenses humanity's deepest fears into a single image. Fear of death, embodied in petrifying eyes. Fear of the feminine untamed, encoded in serpent hair. Fear of chaos spilling across the fragile walls of order. But she is not only fear, she is also protection, transformation, resistance. The same head that terrified invaders, shielded temples, guarded homes, and crowned Athena's aegis. Her image is both curse and cure. Psychology offers one reason. We are hardwired to fear faces with exaggerated features, bulging eyes, sharp teeth, serpent shapes. Yet we are also drawn to them. Medusa's mask is uncanny valley made divine. Culture adds another. Each age remakes her to fit its anxieties. For Greeks, a monster tamed by cunning. For Romans, a violated maiden punished unjustly. For Christians, allegory of sin. For psychoanalysts, terror of sexuality. For feminists, symbol of defiance. She is protean, impossible to pin down, and art has never let her go. Roman mosaics in Pompeii, medieval bestiaries, Renaissance canvases, Freud's essays, Marvel Comics in 1965, reimagining Medusa as queen of the Inhumans with prehensile hair. Even Twitter hashtags in 2017, where her name became shorthand for survivors reclaiming their gaze. In every medium, her face reappears, alive with new meanings. But here's the unsettling twist. Perhaps we keep retelling Medusa not to master her, but to let her master us. To confront her is to face what we most fear in ourselves: rage, power, mortality, and to survive it. Like Perseus, we look at her only through mirrors, screens, and canvases, never directly, and yet her gaze still pierces. So what is the 4,200-year-old secret? It is that Medusa is not dead. She has never been just a monster slain in a cave. She is an evolving mirror of human culture, a face that reflects our shifting fears and hopes. Every age needs its Medusa, because every age needs to decide, what do we fear and what do we protect? And as you leave her story, consider this. When you next see her eyes, whether on a shield, a painting, or a viral post, will you see a monster, a victim, or a guardian? The answer may say more about you than about her. We're only scratching the surface. The next case is even stranger. The 2,800-year-old secret behind the sirens. Subscribe before it drops.